Good morning. Thanks for being with us. And we're delighted that he's back for a second week of punishment. Our interview with Governor Charlie Baker continues now. Welcome back, Governor.
Hey, John.
Glad you could stay. We appreciate it. So, since he took over as chairman of the state Republican Party, Jim Lyons, the former state rep from Andover, has been busy. Sends out a lot of press releases, and they all come into my inbox. And I never delete anything from my inbox. So I saved them all, thinking maybe you and I could talk about some of them. So here's one where he called legislation expanding access to abortion a, quote, radical infanticide bill, and claimed, quoting again, a child of any age would be permitted to have an abortion without ever discussing the options with a parent, loved one, or family member, end quote. Do you agree with that?
I don't think the language that's associated with that helps in these debates. This is a very personal and an important issue for people. And I've always supported a woman's right to choose. And Jim and I, while we absolutely share similar views on a number of issues, including things like the opioid epidemic, there are plenty of issues we disagree on. But yeah, I don't think that language is very helpful to the conversation.
He writes regarding the Mueller report, quote, there was no collusion or obstruction going on at all. Maybe it's time to investigate those responsible for triggering this witch hunt, end quote. You agree with that one?
Well, what I've said about the Mueller report for a while now has been, first of all, that I wanted it to get finished. I didn't want it to get, there's all this talk about Mueller not being allowed to finish his work and all the rest. I was always, let the guy finish his work. And, and I think it's important that he speak in his own voice, which I hope he will, to Congress as they move forward on some of these investigations. And I think for all intents and purposes, most people believe the guy handled this whole thing in a very professional way. And I think it's important that he have a chance, that he have a chance to speak to his own report, which so far he really hasn't had a chance to do.
You don't think it was a witch hunt?
I think I certainly think his comments in his report about the role that Russia played in our election are frightening, okay? Anybody who's not paying attention to that is missing one of the biggest issues in that whole report. You get past the Republican-Democrat, the Clinton-Trump stuff, all the rest, there's a really big, hairy, ugly item that's really not getting much attention, which is that the Russian government worked extraordinarily hard to have a direct impact on an American election. And I fully expect that they will chase a similar strategy, probably with different tactics, in 2020. And I sure as heck hope we are prepared for that. That's like the piece of this conversation that I think is missing. And as everybody's down there fighting with each other over how much they can't stand or don't like each other, meanwhile, you have a global power that screwed around pretty heavily in our election, which we better be preparing for the next one.
One more from the chairman of the Mass Republican Party. Just the other day, on Attorney General Maura Healey's objection to the U.S. Attorney's decision to prosecute a judge for allegedly obstructing justice by letting a defendant avoid capture by immigration police, he wrote, does the state's top prosecutor think she answers to the Democratic Party or to the law-abiding taxpayers she is assigned to protect? Do you agree with that question?
I think the most important issue, again, in this one, we need to take some of the personalities and some of the finger-pointing out of some of our public dialogue. And I said from the beginning that I thought what Judge Joseph did, as reported originally, was troubling, and I thought it should be investigated. It was investigated. The U.S. Attorney made a decision to indict based on the information that was available to him and whatever kind of conversations he was having with the judge and with her representatives.
Do you support his decision? I think it was wise.
What Lelling chose to do? I don't think it was political, if that's what you mean. I think we filed legislation. We don't have a detainer policy in Massachusetts. The SJC struck it down, said Massachusetts has no statutory authority to create a detainer policy to deal with people who are of interest to the federal government, right? For small crimes, large crimes, the works. And we filed legislation 2 years ago to create a solution to that would have had federal law enforcement, state law enforcement, local law enforcement working together to ensure that really bad people who are here that are convicted or captured for one reason or another, who don't belong in this country and don't have standing in this country, would get into the hands of the feds and dealt with appropriately. And I think our legislation is a solution to that. And I would much rather have us here in Massachusetts talk about making sure that there's an appropriate way for state, local, and federal law enforcement to work together on these issues than having these kinds of conversations.
I got to take our break here.
Because most people in Massachusetts care more about the public safety issue than they do about the rest.
I got to take our break, but just very briefly, obviously you disagree sharply with the chairman of your own party here on some issues, agree on others. Are you comfortable with him as party chairman?
Like I said, he and I agree on some stuff. We disagree on others. I don't support, I support a woman's right to choose, but I have serious concerns about changing the state's policy with respect to late-term abortions.
All right, we're going to take that break and we'll be back with a final word with Governor Charlie Baker in just a moment.